Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In tonight's grievance debate, I'm going to outline the biggest grievance that myself and many Victorians have, and that is the way in which the Labor Party, both the Labor Party at a state level under the Andrews government and their very close allies here in Canberra, have in many respects ensured that Victoria is behind every other state in our country. And today I was reminded of this fact when seeing reports of the presentation of James Hardie, their quarterly forecast and results presentation today. They were speaking about plans that they had to set up a new facility in Victoria, a greenfield site that would employ 200 people. And in their quarterly report today and forecast, they outlined that they would no longer be proceeding with that new greenfield site, that new manufacturing capability in Victoria. Instead, that they would continue with a site that they'd planned to close in New South Wales instead. And it was very clear that the reason that they were doing that is that Victoria is no place to do business. And the Labor government, with their succession of taxes, charges and their inability to understand the economy and what it takes to make a state budget work, has meant that that large business would not be creating 200 jobs in Victoria. Instead, those jobs will go to New South Wales. Now, the truth is those decisions are being made by businesses, large and small, every day. Every day businesses are making the decision that Victoria is not a good place to do business because of the entrenched decisions of the Labor government. Now, the reality is the Labor government in Victoria and the Labor government here in Canberra are joined at the hip. They are one and the same. The Labor members who sit in this caucus are closely aligned factionally and otherwise with every single member of that state government. And what Victorians are facing in Victoria, they can quite rightly blame this federal Labor government as much as they would the state government. Now, we obviously have seen very little from the federal government in the way of they're taking responsibility for decisions that Victorians are now suffering for because of their close allies, their fellow party members in the Victorian Labor Party who in many respects are running the economy and the budget in Victoria into the ground. We didn't hear much from the Labor government up here when Daniel Andrews and the Labor government cancelled the Commonwealth Games. Something that they went to the election saying that they would do. They bid for it. They snuck in there and said they were going to do it. They said they would deliver it. And now it looks like Victorian taxpayers will be slugged potentially billions in order to pay compensation for the decision of the Labor government to cancel the Commonwealth Games, the games that they went out and went after. We hear nothing from the federal Labor government. They support them, obviously. We've seen no criticism from the federal Labor Party. Perhaps it's because the Prime Minister and Premier in Victoria are former housemates, very good friends, very close allies, socialist left allies. The socialist left is large and in charge of the Labor Party. The mainstream Australian Labor Party is long gone now. The socialist left has taken over, and we see that today with their decision, the activists' decisions around Israel. God knows what else they will come up with at their national convention. But the Commonwealth Games are Victorians paying billions for. Now, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, we're very accustomed to suffering under decisions of the Labor government. We all remember in the east the $1.3 billion that Victorians were forced to pay not to build a road. That's not $1.3 billion to build a road, $1.3 billion to cancel the East-West link, and now we suffer crippling traffic every single day on the Eastern Freeway, thanks to that decision from the Victorian Labor Party, supported by their federal Labor colleagues, supported by the Albanese Labor government. Now we see the latest instalment of the socialist left being large and in charge, and that is they are banning gas connections to new homes. It's just a precursor, I presume, to banning gas in total. So no new homes will have gas connections. Now, at a time when they've run our electricity grid into the ground, when power prices are going through the roof, when gas prices are going through the roof, they're going to make Victorians more reliant on the ever-expensive electricity, and that's before we've even got into the heat of summer, when I think many are suggesting that blackouts or brownouts, at the very least, are likely to be the fate of Victorians again. Victorians suffering because of decisions of the Victorian Labor Party. That's the Victorian Labor Party in the state government and the Victorian Labor Party that sit up here in Canberra in Anthony Albanese's caucus. And where are those colleagues here in Canberra who back the decision of the state government to cancel gas connections? So no gas heating, no gas cooking, no barbecues for all those who have got or who would like tapped.
Deacon, if you could just pause for a moment. Remember to use people's titles. It's the Prime Minister.
I didn't think I referred to the Prime Minister, did I?
No, there's been an occasion where you refer to Anthony Albanese.
The Prime Minister and the caucus up here presumably support very strongly the decision of the State Labor Party to ban gas connections, making families ever more reliant on expensive electricity. And they can't run away from this. They can't hide. The Labor members that sit up here in the caucus are Labor members who, in many cases, are supported in their pre-selections by the socialist left, which is controlled by Daniel Andrews in the Labor Party in Victoria. I mean, he is omnipresent in the Victorian Labor Party. He runs the place, and I suspect many of the Labor members who sit in the caucus up here are only here because they're very closely aligned, very close allies of Daniel Andrews or his radical socialist left members in the Victorian government. Now, why did the Victorian government, why did they cancel the Commonwealth Games? Well, because they're broke. They've run out of money. For the older Victorians and Australians out there, it would be no surprise that a Labor government has come in and they've spent all the money and there's no more money. And at some point, the debt starts to control you. And there's no, I don't think anyone believes that Daniel Andrews and the Labor Party wanted to cancel the Commonwealth Games. They had to. They had to. Why? Because the debt's now controlling them. Debt is, in Victoria, higher than New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania and I think South Australia combined. One state. That is debt that will be borne by generations of Victorians, thanks to Victorian Labor and their caucus members that sit up here in Anthony Albanese's government. I don't really know how anybody could be proud of
if the member for Deakin
record.
could pause again. Again, you referred to the Prime Minister by his name.
Okay, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't think anyone could be proud of that record. And what Victorians are now facing, thanks to Labor, is, as I said, a state, sadly, that will have less job opportunities because businesses are leaving. Will have higher debts. Their children will inherit higher debt, and that's a tax on the next generation, being facilitated by the Albanese government. We will have higher electricity prices. We will have an electricity grid that is probably the weakest in the nation, thanks to the policies of Victorian Labor. And no matter how much the Victorian Labor members up here try to disassociate themselves or try to distance themselves from Daniel Andrews and his government, they are shoulder to shoulder with him. They are members of the same party. They are, in many cases, members of the same faction. And many of them are only in Parliament because of the support that Daniel Andrews provides them. So every single Victorian knows the issues they're facing thanks to the mismanagement and the destructive nature of this Labor government being fully supported by the federal Labor government.
And the member's time has expired.